friend Ben. How are you today, brother?
Very good, my friend. How are you?
No complaints. Been busy out here, and I can't wait to hear what you've been up to lately. It's been, what, a year since we last talked?
Yeah, probably about that. Not
So
too much has been going on. Well, you know how it goes. Everything and nothing all at the same time. So let's see. Recently was speaking at the NOFA Winter Conference on integrated pest management and organic flowering systems. It's the first time that NOFA has actually had a cannabis track. For those that don't know, NOFA is the Northeastern Organic Farmers Association. So it was kind of a big deal of, big ag in the sense of our area. Starting to recognize and pick up on that this is an entire track of its own as far as knowledge and skill sets. So that was nice. Had a great time speaking on that panel, as well as getting to listen in on the primary panel, which was the regeneration of soils through organic methodologies, again, geared towards cannabis. So that was a lot of fun. Really great people, beautiful, beautiful organization, wonderful time. Aside from that, working hard on the farm this year. Been really, really focused on trying to build more sustainable food sources on the farm. So working on our multiple different varieties of orchards, as well as our berries, has been like a really big focus this year, bringing in blackberries, thornless blackberries, Thompsons, as well as golden and raspberries and standard raspberries that we have. We have 3 different types of regular raspberries. And then we brought in Chandler's as well as sea blue blueberries. So really been focused this past winter on building for this coming spring and getting some new crops up and developed onto the farmstead, as well as spreading, education and working with people in the field.
Nice. So this is happening at the property in Massachusetts, or was it Rhode Island? Massachusetts. Yep. Nice. That's fantastic. How did you overwinter all these berries? I'm assuming you just got canes.
Yeah. So very carefully. I planted each of them individually. They were bare roots originally. So I planted each of them and have been delicately babying them in a quasi hybrid environment. So I've got a back porch that is exposed to the non-primary winds. So it's able to shelter them and harbor them a little bit. So during the less intense weathers, I've been putting them on the back deck and allowing them to sort of exist in the outdoor New England winter. And during the more intense weather, I've been bringing them indoors, but still keeping them right next to that glass wall and blanketing them so that they stay on the colder side than the warmer side. So that way the environment of my home doesn't so much awaken them and allows them to stay dormant so that they can continue to overwinter properly.
Well, that's really good thinking.
Like all farmers, getting by with what you have and working with what you can.
Now, what about regular watering, I assume? Is it still something
much more minimal? When the plants are overwintering, their water consumption goes very, very, very low. So it's been enabling me to, water them maybe once a month or so in 1 gallon pots. And so far, so good. We've got good, vibrant life colors throughout the stalks. No leaf development, which was a big thing that we were trying to prevent because I didn't want any, real awakening of the plants until they're ready to go into their springtime homes and start to get established in their root zones. Right now in the East Coast, specifically where I am, it's been a real battle. The weather this winter has been such a flip-flop back and forth between warm and then cold and then warm and then cold and then freezing cold, that we've had a lot of plants outdoors that have begun to false flower and start bringing out blossoms, thinking that they were in early spring based off of the weather environment around them. And then they get a really hard bite of cold and it just does some serious damage. So we've been trying our best to protect the plants that we have outside, wrapping them up and keeping them in burlaps if necessary, or wrapping them in straw. And the ones that we've got on the interior, trying to keep them not too warm so that they don't blossom out, like I said, and start to respond, because we keep our house relatively warm And the room that they're off of is right off our living room where the wood stove is. So trying best to sort of balance that warm, dry, cool, dry environment to keep them where they need to be.
That's a lot of work, my friend. Farmers never sleep, right?
No, my friend, no. You know what they say, passion never sleeps. So most farmers that I know are very passionate, and I like to think that I am one of them. And so it definitely takes a lot of passion and perseverance and persistence to grow plants where they're not meant to be grown, when they're not meant to be grown, and keep them holding on through.
Agreed, 100%.
Absolutely, man.
So are you still developing some of your cannabis cultivars?
Yes and no. So this past year, I took a break on any sort of breeding. We had hoped to have the renovations done on our home this summer and fall, but everything sort of got pushed back a little bit due to just life circumstances, as well as economics. And so that led us to a little bit of a further period. But because of that, I decided not to start anything outdoors. So I didn't do any outdoor breeding projects this year. And the basement is packed full of all of our storage from the first and second floors as we're getting ready to do the second floor renovation. So right now has not been a breeding time for me. That said, though, I've had a few friends that we've been doing some work with, and we've been working on some autoflowers. And I have to say, I'm very, very impressed with the distance that autoflower genetics has come in the past decade or so. They really went from something, 15, 20 years ago when I was first starting to dabble. It was a novelty. It was a, sort of, hey, look at this cool little thing and watch it do what it does, but it's never, ever going to be something that you would utilize for production. Certainly not something for high-end product, but there's really been a big turnaround in the genetics breeding world in the past, I would say 5 years specifically, but the past decade sort of starting, where we've now seen autoflowers that are 50 days old, and they're pushing a 3x3 really hard with a very well developed canopy over 2.5 feet deep and really good yields of high quality flower. I mean, they're not pushing those high 30s, low 40s on tax, but they're easily coming in the mid to high 20s. Great terpene profiles and really overall robust growth. It's pretty impressive.
Now, it used to be that if you planted them in a small pot, as soon as that top root hits the bottom, it triggers them. Have they modified that at all?
So I have not yet been able to see anything that actually allows the plants to not begin to trigger if their roots are triggered. That said, I have seen some of the breeding that has begun to get to the point where they're less susceptible to the level of tolerance, shall we call it, where before, you planted a seed and it was in just, let's say, a solo cup. And that solo cup only allowed for maybe a 2 to 3 inch diameter of root growth overall before one of those roots would start to hit an edge. And as soon as that happened, we would start to have development in the plant itself because it would start to feel confined. And that would cut short your early vegetative stage before any pre-flowering would begin to set in. Now, what I've seen is not so much that the genetics allow you to really pass that point, but they do allow for a larger level of leniency and tolerance. So they're less susceptible with lower levels of stimulus to begin that process. So they are now allowing us to have a little bit more leeway and play. I still always highly recommend plant it in its forever home. Don't mess around with transplants if you don't have to when it comes to autos. And if capable, have it not only in its final pot, but have it in its final place. So if you're going to go from a 2x4 tent to a 5x5 tent, or, go from your small bedroom into a larger flowering room, if I can, I like to start them where they're going to be. And considering the fact that they're autoflowers, you really don't need to give them that. Let's say we're talking like cultivation in facilities like I work with. You're not talking about a really big difference in environmentals. So the difference in that first few weeks of life of having it in the bedroom versus the flowering room really isn't that important, at least not in my opinion. When you're having something that cracks from seed, it has a lot better potential to be able to deal with higher levels of intensities if it's exposed to them directly off the bat of its exposure. So what I mean by that is if you plant a seed and it cracks and comes to its initial vegetative fruition in a high intensity environment, like a flowering environment, it is more likely to survive in that than if you were to crack something in the lighter vegetative environment, something with, let's say sub 1000 ppfd, 500-600, like we're usually going to be aiming for. And then you bring it into that very, very shortly afterwards. I sort of would say it's similar to starting things outdoors. You know what I mean? You can't dial the sun down. But if you start something indoors under T5s or light CFLs or anything like that, and then you transition it outside into intense light, it doesn't transition well. But if you start it outdoors under that intense light, it does a much better job of adapting.
Interesting. And I'm assuming it's still a very low fertility plant, or has that shifted as well in the breeding?
I would defer you to my buddies that are the geneticists mostly, but it's definitely shifted. It's become better. It's definitely achieved a higher.
It's a heavy feeder now.
Not comparatively to some of the ones that I've seen, as far as the standard photos, but much heavier feeders than they used to be. They used to be very dainty. They really just sort of sipped on nutrients here and there. They were very easy to sort of set and forget because you could give it a single feed protocol and just sort of let it rip. Especially things like super soils were fantastic for that because you could really let the plant feed as it desired, as it grew. But at this point, yeah, I mean, I've seen some autos now that are pretty heavy feeders and throwing some chonks. And really, if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was a smaller photo that just got thrown into flower at an earlier stage. But they've come a long way, man. And some of them specifically really feed heavy on the potassium and sulfur.
Interesting. Wow, that's really.
Yeah, I think that has to do with those particular cultivars are really terp dominant. So they're really looking for those precursors to be able to develop those profiles, where some of the other ones are looking really still more for like that biomass development. So you're looking a lot more at, your calciums, your potassiums, your nitrogens. But the ones that are really heavy in phosphorus, heavy in potassium, heavy in sulfur, are really pushing those terpene profiles of, upwards 3s, low 4s.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, never ever where I would have thought to ever see an autoflower.
Right. I mean, those were considered the starter boys, like the easy ones. You just throw them in the ground, set and forget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now I know people that are running entire cultivations with set and forget mentality. Pre-inoculating an outdoor acre of land and then running a full set of autos 2-3 times in a season, predominantly for extractions at that point. But they're still getting phenomenal yields. They're getting great profiles, and they're starting to make the solventless game a little bit more competitive.
Well, that's always been the beauty of those things is you can do 3 crops in a season where you can't do that with a typical photo period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you're pulling depths of the photo, you're pulling maybe 2 good yields, 2.5 if you really have a built-out team that you can push really hard on.
Interesting. What else I want to catch up with you about? So you've been renovating. That's a whole nother ball game. So that's been probably burning.
Yeah, project managing my own renovations has been a thing for sure. Managing, multiple acquisitions of different vendors, getting different quotes, building it all out, planning it. I designed the entire thing myself. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a bit of a nightmare, and I look forward to finishing it.
Well, you may or may not remember, but I was a general contractor.
Yeah, you were.
As a carpenter to a general contractor, for my whole life. I mean, you never really stop being a general contractor. If you know how the carpentry skills, the set of how to deal with subcontractors and everything like that, then it's in your blood. So yeah. I remember those days of whether it was my house or someone else's project. It's challenging. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of after-hour stuff that's absolutely critical, whether it be layout, whether it be coordinating, because a lot of these guys, when they're on the site, they're not communicating because they're trying to work. So it's that real difficult, for any type of business where you've got to be the employee as well as the boss. One minute you got the tool belt on, the next minute you got the briefcase out. So it's a lot of work. So I respect that you had to step back from your typical work to accomplish that. But once it's done, it'll be a big relief, I'm sure.
Well, it's a big year. We've got the renovations. We have the expansion in my business. My fiance has branched out and now has started her own business doing wealth management and is doing exceptionally well at it. Something that really, really fits well for her. She really specifically wants to work with entrepreneurs and help them to develop a wealth management system that supports themselves and their families and gives them the longevity and the ability to grow. And she did that for me with helping me with my initial business construct. And so now she's sort of branched out to doing that on her own. But what's funny is that doing project management on my own construction sort of comes full circle, because much like yourself, I did GC work for 8 years or so, in the contracting business for over 15 years. And that's really what gave me my framework for running project management for cultivation facility developments. Was I already understood how to manage the electricians, the plumbers, the drywall, the HVAC, your standard wall carpenters and framing, getting the basics all set up, in what order things had to happen, and how to make sure that everything was timelined so that way we weren't wasting time, but we also weren't stacking vendors on top of each other, getting them to trip up on each other, allowing them to have that sort of space to work and breathe, but also still really staying on a tight timeline. So I took that from doing construction. We morphed that into doing project development for cultivation facilities, which essentially just took what I had learned in the residential realm and it extrapolated out to a much larger scale. So now instead of working with, a 2,000 square foot home, we're working with a 20 to 200,000 square foot warehouse. And instead of thinking about rooms and bedrooms and bathrooms, I'm thinking about flowering rooms, vegetative rooms, and clone rooms, ancillary rooms, project management rooms, offices, conference rooms, all of those sort of secondary spaces. So after having done that for a number of years and then coming back to the residential to do my own home, it's been a weird twist where I keep finding myself looking at my project plans and my own home and being like, well, do I have enough workspace flow here? Like, what about, should I write a spaghetti chart on where my wife, my children, and I are going to be using the bathrooms and all of that, like trying to be lean and efficient with spaces, and then realizing that it's not that big of a deal. But the brain can't help but run that way, because it's the way that I've taught myself over the past decade for my processes to function. So now when I look at a space, I can't help but think about optimization of that space. And instead of thinking about livable enjoyment in that space, my fiance, like a perfect example, is like, well, we could put, like this little nook in here and it'll be really cute. And, it'll be very nice that we can just sort of lounge there and we can look out the windows and enjoy the sunrise. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to be an inhibition on this, this, and this. And that's not very efficient. And she looks at me and she's like, it's our home. It doesn't have to be pure efficiency. And I was like, you're right. It's more about enjoyment here, less about efficiency. So I'm learning to sort of tailor back my psychological perspective and the way that my brain wants to drive things towards efficiencies and towards lean operations. And it's like, your bedroom and master bathroom should not be about lean operations. They should be about comfort. Building the children's room is not about maximizing square footage. It's about maximizing living space. So it's been a very cool, a little bit humbling and interesting sort of round circle for me to come back from working in residential to then working in commercial to working in hyper specialized commercial and really refining every little aspect of it to now flipping back to residential. But it's residential now where I am the one that makes all the decisions versus being the person working for the client, being like, well, here's what they want. How can we make that optimized? How can we make that work? Where it's like, I'm the one making the decision of what do I want. It's like, well, what do I want needs to be given a little bit more consideration versus just the lean operation and like effectiveness and efficiencies and cost efficiency and all of that.
How hard is it to ask yourself, what do I really want? Like, I go to the grocery store and I struggle with that question, right? And when you're dealing with something as permanent as a construction project, you never want to get through it or halfway through it and go, oh, damn, I wish I thought of that, right? Yep. So how did you fight the the demons in your head to overthink everything and come out the other end without driving yourself insane?
Very much the same way that I do it in my professional life. And that was one of the spots where I came sort of round circle again. And it comes back to trusting your team. So I have faith in my fiance, and I had faith in my architect. Even though I was the one that did all the design work, he has to be the one at the end of the day that can stamp it and give me the architectural designs to be able to bring forth for permitting, just like in the standard situation we would have with a commercial facility. So I used them as my safe stops. And when I felt myself starting to potentially sort of dive a little too deep, dig a little too much in, I would refer to them and be like, hey, what do you think? Is this over the top? Am I being a little too granular? And the answer is almost always yes. So really it's about having those safeguards in place, having people that you trust when you can't trust yourself, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah. And building those relationships prior, and building those trust networks prior to the point, because you never want to be in a situation where you're like, I need a safeguard now. Who am I going to pick? That's like building the fire building the fire drill once the house is on fire.
Right.
You do the fire drills beforehand. You pick your meeting point, you pick your safe spaces before there's an issue. So luckily I can rely very, very strongly on my fiance. She's a great grounding force for me. She's been one of my greatest supporters since I first started, and she's really good at bringing me back to what's really important, and helping me think about what I really need to be focusing on in the project. Not my fears, not my concerns, but staying focused on, the right here, right now. What can I actually tangibly do? The 3-foot world, if you will, taking a note from my military family. And, the things that you can actually actionably change. And, I was getting caught up at one point a lot in supply chain logistics and coordinating all of our different vendors, having the trusses for our second floor roof built custom. So they have to be pre-made to order and then delivered to the property. And you need to order those about a month and a half before you start doing any demo. So before you can even rip the second floor of the house off, you need to already know exactly what it's going to be to the exact specified measurements to have it pre-built for you to be delivered. So that way you can assemble it in a reasonable amount of time. Not too unlike what a lot of what we do in the cannabis space when we're dealing with large scale facility build out. But for some reason that I don't understand, having the emotional tie to it of having it be my home just threw a monkey wrench in my brain. And it just, I can handle a $50 million project, no problem. But you throw a $300,000 remodel at me, and all of a sudden my head's spinning because I'm emotionally tied to it. And it's also my childhood home where I grew up. So I'm having the whole conceptual issue also of just like changing the house that I grew up in. That's always been the same way for the most part. The layout, the structure, all of it's been there. And yeah, we've painted rooms and we've changed little things, but it's not the same. And so it's definitely been a challenge, and it's definitely been something that I can thankfully say that I am bringing to beneficial bear in my professional life. It has taught me to not hold so closely to pre-anticipation and to pre-expectation. It has taught me to be a lot more flexible and solution-driven. And it has really made me want to be more preemptive with all aspects of the design and build process, where things where prior I would be like, you know what, we've hashed it 3 times, we're good. I'll hash it one more time now, just to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing, nothing that we could reconsider. And also giving ourselves secondary plans in the sense of when we first started building on this, we had a very different economics place in the United States. And therefore, that meant that our cost of materials was very different. Our cost of labor were very different. So being able to have a plan for not only what if things go wrong in the sense of the build out, construction, permits, whatever, but also having a secondary plan in the sense of materials and labor. and availabilities and timelines of, all right, well, here's the key things that we want as far as materials. What if they're not available? What if something happens in our supply chain logistics that causes them to no longer be viable, either timeline wise or economically? And it's not acceptable to just say, well, the project's trashed. You know what I mean? Well, our budget's done and the project's over. You have to be able to pivot, and to be able to do that effectively, efficiently, and economically, you have to have had that thought process beforehand. So I like to now have, before it was data in threes. If I didn't have 3 plans, it wasn't a viable project. Now it's like, if I don't have 4 plans, 5 plans, it's not viable, because I want to have my A plan of like, everything goes great. I want to have my B plan of logistics go wrong, because that's the number 1. My C plan of timeline goes wrong, because that's second. But then I also want to have a D and an E plan of, what if they both go wrong? Or what if there's a unexpected global issue that happens, such as war, feast, famine, COVID, anything like that we've dealt with now in the past 6 years, more and more commonly. How do we really protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from that, so that way we can protect and insulate the clientele? Because at the end of the day, they're relying on us as business professionals to be able to provide a service for them. And regardless whether that service is design or build out or logistics or operational efficiencies, they often cannot afford to hear shit happens, And unfortunately, that is a reality that we live in. Shit happens. It happens all the fucking time. And it often happens to our detriment. Rarely do we're like, dude, shit happens. We just made an extra 10%. That's not usually how it goes. Right. So what we're really focused on is trying to think of the unthought of, plan for it, be prepared for it. Again, going back to military background in my family, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. So you build out 3 contingencies on what could potentially, hypothetically, go horribly wrong. But you still hope that none of it does, and you hope for that A plan. You hope for that everything goes pretty well according to plan, and you're able to get it done in a reasonable amount of time, on a budget, and in the timeline that's efficient for everybody. But the reality is, as you understand as a GC, even prior to this, it almost never happens.
No, you don't understand how many jobs I lost for speaking truth. And the truth was typically, you need to be prepared for this to take 2 to 3 times longer than we estimate. And the budget could potentially double if we run into this, we find that, or you change something. And you don't understand like how prepared I'd make people, like, don't change anything, because you don't understand what change does. Change stops everything in its tracks. Now we got to back out, reestimate, tell everybody to go home. That's all costing you money. These guys are not going to go home for free. You've got to pay them for the day at least. And then when you go to reschedule it, they're on another job now. So you think they're going to drop the other job and come right back to you? No. So if you pull that trigger, understand it's going to be costly, both with time and money. And and I've lost jobs for being honest like that. And it's
absolutely.
So I love the thought process of having, all these other contingencies, set up, or at least thought about, so that when something like that does happen to you, because let's face it, you are emotional, you are working on your own project, you can't stop that part of it. So that makes a lot of sense. That was really, really good thinking. And this is not where I was expecting to go, but this is very typical on this show. but what happens is, it brings out some really good things that people can think about when they are taking on a project, whether it's renovating a garden, renovating a space, building a friggin' bench, right? All these things come into play. It's like, well, what do I really want? What do I really need? And what happens if I can't get the 2x4s that I need that are long enough to do this project? Yep. So that's some really great advice. I appreciate that, and I'm glad we stumbled down this path.
Well, really, it all came from lessons that I learned in the professional space. This is a huge project for me personally, financially. But when you put it in perspective of the projects that I've worked on, I've done projects upwards of $30 million, $40 million. And when you're working on a project of that scale, a rework order can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where a rework order on the project that I'm working on now with my home, maybe a couple thousand, 10 grand, maybe at the outside. So it's almost like my professional capacity has given me the comfort and the ability to feel empowered to be able to handle my own home, because I've learned how to do this at such a larger scale with such heavier and weightier ramifications on the line, that when it came to doing my own home, it was like, oh, so much easier, because I have to think through things so much more exponentially on the projects that I do professionally, because a change order or anything along those lines is just such a larger ramification financially. And therefore, like you said, time-wise, any form of change brings everything to a halt unless it's done properly in the pre-design phase. And that's one of the reasons that I harp so much on the fact that my clients need to focus 75% of their time in the pre-design phase. We need to think through every single aspect of a facility's operations and every single contingency and every single eventuality while it's all on paper, because paper is cheap. Paper and ink is cheap. And you know what? I don't care how much somebody charges you per hour for their time. Like, let's say hypothetically, I've worked with vendors, they're 200 plus, 300 plus an hour just for their time to talk about things on paper. You're talking exponentially less than once that facility is built or partially built. And then you're like, hey, well, you know what? What if this wall wasn't here? Or what if we put this wall here? Or what if the drains came out? Actually, perfect example. I was working with a client on a 5,000 square foot micro business, small cultivation, processing, and manufacturing. And they decided that they wanted to bump the walls 3 inches one direction to increase the amount of space they had in a corridor, because they did not, prior to this, think about the fact that that corridor was too small for a pallet jack to be able to maneuver through. And they needed their pallet jacks to be able to bring soil structures into their flowering rooms to do reconstitution of their beds after the fact that they had done multiple runs. So we get to this point and they're like, oh man, we never thought about having to bring a pallet jack in there. And we definitely can't fit an automated jack in. We definitely can't fit a forklift. So it's going to have to be a manual jack. And is that even going to really fit through this corridor space? And then it wouldn't, because it wasn't able to make the corners with the pallet on the front, which is another thing that they thought that they had thought about, but they didn't, because they didn't account for just the pallet jack. They didn't account for the extension of the pallet on the front of the pallet jack. Even though those pallet forks go through most of the pallet, they don't go through all of the pallet. So that extra foot or so was too much. So we're sitting here and we're thinking about it, and they're like, all right, well, we'll just bump these walls in from the flowering rooms, and that'll give us the space that we need in the corridor. Well, by bumping those walls in, we changed where the drain lines for the condensate were now going to be going through the walls into the floors to go to the capture space. So now we've got those lines in the halls. So because we didn't think through properly the entirety of the facility and its operations, not just the facility itself, but the operations that would be happening within the facility and the equipment that is utilized for those operations, we found ourselves with a situation of, we either can't fit the pallet jacks through the hallway because the walls are in the way, or we bump the walls, limiting the space in the flowering rooms by a bit, losing canopy space by an entire bent switch, which ended up being hundreds of square feet of canopy within that room, because we lost an entire corridor's width of canopy space of 4 feet of bed, because we had to cut in 5 inches into it, because you can't just limit the bed space. It's a rolling rack. If you cut into it, it's gone. And then on top of that, they ended up shooting themselves in the foot, because they didn't think about the fact that now the lines that were already cast into the concrete that were supposed to be inside those walls, now they moved those walls. Now those are inside the corridor, and therefore continue to limit the ability for them to move those pump jacks for the pallet lift. So because there wasn't a really, really thorough thought process beyond just the basics of functionality and all of that, they ended up having to do a $100,000 rework of not only moving the walls, And not only moving the lines, but they had to cut up all of their concrete pad that they had already poured there to re-put new lines for the drainage that was coming from the condensate through the walls. And all of that could have just been prevented in the beginning if they had just took the time during the pre-construction phase to really, really think everything through. And I get it, because when you're in pre-construction, all you want to do is start swinging hammers. Like, you just want to get to it. You just want to break some ground and start building the thing that you have been envisioning. But you still got to take the time, and you need to think through. I always say spend 75% of your time on the pre-construction, 25% of the time building it. It's like the age-old adage of construction. Measure twice, cut once. I believe measure 3 times, cut once. Because you measured it once and you're like, all right, we're good. You measure it twice and you're like, all right, I think we're good. You measure it the third time and you're like, I know we're good. Or you find on the third time where you're like, what the fuck did we do those other 2 times?
Yeah,
how did we get this number? And then
the measure tape got caught on the fucking end, right? How many times is that?
Yep, exactly. So it's really about taking the time in that pre-construction phase, in that design phase, to really think through every single aspect. And that's whether you're doing construction and carpentry and residential, or you're doing it in commercial. It's just that the UF'd up ticket in commercial is much larger than in residential.
So true. It's almost like you want to encourage them to have completed their SOPs before they even shovel in the dirt.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not really feasible, because, to be honest, SOPs are so driven by the team that's operating them and their comfort level, their knowledge level, their skill level, and then also the ethos and goals of the facility as a team. But you can get so much of it that you need for the design from those things. And if you don't have preliminary SOPs done ahead of time, then you forget things like, oh man, our clone room really should have a slop sink, huh? It needs to have its own air exchange cycle separate from mom and from veg in case there's a contaminant. It needs to have a separate entry and exit point from those rooms, so that way if we have an incursion in mom or veg or clone, we can continue our life cycle and we can continue production methodologies without having to suddenly limit 3/4 of our space because, oh, well, man, we had a PM outbreak or a pathogen or a pest or whatever in veg, but we can only get to veg through mom, and to get to there, we also have to touch into clone. And so we don't want to contaminate. So we're going to leave it all alone, or even worse, we can't leave it all alone. So we have to continue cycle. And now you're just spreading that contamination throughout your entire facility. And there's so many places that are like that don't have the ability to isolate when you have those incursions. And the one thing I promise every single one of my clients is at some point somewhere, something will go wrong and something will get in. So it's really just about having those things thought out beforehand, having them considered in your design phase and your SOP phase, so that way they complement each other and give you the ability to have the control that you need.
Agreed, 100%. That was like when I first started working in the cannabis space, the first thing I would say is, well, where's your biosecurity? You guys are nuts. Like, you're bringing in from, your own employees are going into their own grows with their own problems and bringing them to your facility. You're not making them change. You're not making them shower. You have no foot washers. I mean, the potential for a disaster here is through the roof.
Absolutely.
And you're not even thinking about that. And a lot of them laughed at me like, oh, we don't worry about that stuff. And it's like, whoa, yeah, I'm gonna wait for that phone call that, oh shit, Leighton, now what do we do? Right. And that's, it was, almost guaranteed in a lot of the first times I started working with these people that they ended up, just like you said, shit happens. A bug gets in, a clone comes in dirty that you couldn't see, russet mites. Those things were friggin' a nightmare because
they're insidious.
They're so entrenched, right?
Yep. So, I mean, it really comes down to anticipating everything that will go wrong, which it sounds like it's difficult, but it's really not. Just think of everything that can go wrong and then make a list.
Yeah, I was going to say, write it down because you missed something.
Yep. And then add to it. And then ask all the people that that grow. Be like, hey, did I miss anything that could go catastrophically wrong? And then start to build out a plan of what happens after. if one of those things goes wrong, what do you do? And you don't have to have that plan implemented at that time, but have the plan.
Well, you got
what I mean? Have the fire drill before the house is on fire is one of the things I always go back to. You don't want to be like, we should have a meeting place because I smell smoke. You don't want to be in that situation. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort, time, or money to take that time and take that forethought before it becomes an issue. It's just often that so many people are so eager to get going that they shoot themselves in the foot. And instead of taking that little bit of extra time to give the preliminary thought and then the planning and the prevention and having the protocols in place to either prevent or to react, they just say, we'll deal with it when it comes up. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I agree that, you cross the bridge when you get there to some extent. So that's why I won't start treating for something before I see it. But I damn well have the treatment already thought out. I don't get to the point where it's like, so I'm going to cross this bridge. How do you walk over bridges? What is a bridge? No, you have all of that done beforehand. And it's just like, okay, here's where we're at. Do we cross that bridge? And what are the pros and cons?
Yep. What happens when we get to the other side?
Exactly.
Have your horticultural oil in the closet. Don't order it when you need it.
Yep. And I mean, I'm a big fan of beneficials. Far too many people try to use beneficials as a reactionary measure versus a preventative measure.
No.
Beneficials are exclusively beneficial to you as preventatives. They're prophylactic. They're designed to help you prevent the problems from becoming an economic threshold rather than responding to the problem once it has hit an economic threshold. Now, that doesn't mean that they're, perfect. You use beneficials and you have to support them and you have to understand the proper way to utilize them. You have to understand the life cycles of what you're trying to treat. So you can't simply be like, I just throw the kitchen sink at it all the time, so I know I'm always good. It's like, well, yes and no. It's good to be aggressively prophylactic, but it is also within an economic threshold. And yeah, if you've got tons of surplus capital that you can just throw at bennies to make sure that things don't come up that may or may not come up, great, sure. But you really need to be doing targeted assessment as to what is your primary pests and pathogens that you deal with in your environment, in your grow. There's going to be, a handful, usually 5 or so, that are your staples for your environment, your crops, your methodologies, all those things. There's going to be about 5 pests or pathogens that are your frequent flyers, so to speak. And those are the ones that you want to have your prophylactics in case for. That's where you want to have that set up in the regiment of, I know that powdery mildew, or I know that thrips, or I know that aphids is an issue that I deal with regularly. Therefore, I'm going to have a consistent protocol and measure in place with a beneficials order at an economic threshold to treat that, versus being like, I'm going to wait till it's an issue and then I'm going to try to respond. Now, if I know that my primary issues are thrips and aphids, I'm not going to be treating for caterpillars constantly. I'm not going to be treating for russet mites or for fungus gnats if they are not something that I am dealing with consistently and dealing with in an expectant to a point where they are having an economic impact. Every single grow that I work with has pests and pathogens. Every one. The key to the successful ones is that they are able to mitigate and maintain below economic thresholds. It is not that they do not have a single pest in their entire grow. It is not that they do not have a single microbe in their entire grow that is detrimental. But what they are able to do is they are able to mitigate them consistently to below an economic threshold. And what that means is that they are able to limit their populations and their population's impacts to below an economic point where it's having an effect on their bottom line. If you're not losing crops, if you're not having to implement larger amounts of labor or pesticide or anything applications, so if you're not having to spend more money to reduce the impact of something that is negatively affecting your bottom line, it's below an economic impact. And a lot of the times fungus gnats are one of the primary ones that I see that are below economic thresholds. If you're not dealing with young plants that are nubile and have delicate root structures that the nymph form of the fungus gnats can destroy those roots and eat them up, they're really not that big of a deal. They can be a vector for diseases, which is something that needs to be considered and watched out for, but they don't have the capacity like some other pests to just come in and decimate a room. Where, you know, Western flower thrips, spider mites, they can come in and pretty rapidly take a very viable crop and turn it into a complete loss real quick. So you need to be aware of, you know, what the ones that have the economics are, what those economic thresholds are, and then what your responses to those economic thresholds are. So if you know that you can, you know, deal with up to 10 to 15 fungus gnats in your sticky cards in your nursery before you begin to see a drop off in your clone's virility and your survival rate. And if you start to see more than that per week on your sticky cards, you know you need to respond. If you know that you can deal with, you know, 20 Western flower thrips per sticky card in your flowering room in weeks 1 through 4, without it having an economic threshold that allows the population to explode in those later weeks of flowering and really decimate your crop, then that's your economic threshold. Don't respond if you don't have to, but always try to be prophylactic. Always try to be ahead of the curve. But don't be so heavily anticipating that curve that you're over treating and over responding and dumping money and or over treating your crops with pesticides or any other types of things you may be using.
Yep. The bell curve can happen very quickly.
Yeah.
It can almost be like a pyramid. Something that's beneficial becomes toxic at some point. So.
Absolutely. I've seen beneficials become predatory. And I mean, it's the way that I look at beneficial insects is very much like the way that people think of weeds. A weed is simply any plant. Any plant. Cannabis can be a weed if it is growing in the wrong place and to a detrimental economic threshold. So if you're growing plants and all of a sudden a cannabis plant crops up in the middle of it, well, it's a weed because it's not what you're trying to grow and it's not where you want it. It's not what you're looking for. So it's very, very similar with anything else. You know, you can have, what's a good example? Rove beetles. Rove beetles are phenomenal beneficial. I have also seen rove beetles decimate cannabis crops because they did not have enough food sources and their populations were so high that they began to literally attack the cannabis because they wanted something else to eat. Pill bugs are an example of it as well. And I've seen pill bugs who are generally detritivores that are great at breaking down, you know, your basic mulch layers. They did not have enough and they started just munching on the cannabis base meristems and wiped a whole room out because within a week and a half, they had eaten so much of it that they couldn't bounce back economically.
Yep, so true. Great examples, my friend. Great examples. Now, we went a little bit further into the woods than I wanted to, but let's reel it back in and let's talk about your breeding program because you bred something that I found was so special, that orange bound.
Yep.
Just super unique. It was not super high THC. Amazing terpene profile. Flavor was just through the friggin' roof. And it was very creative. It was, it was a good mental high, not a couch lock. So have you been playing with that line? I think that was a one-off, wasn't it? It was a F1
so that was actually that was some genius work of a friend of mine, good friend Tom from Green Team Genetics. He's the original breeder of the fruit bound, orange fruit bound in this case, which was an Agent Orange from Subcool that was crossed to a 195. And it was one of my favorites in a long time. I mean, you really enjoyed it too. And I crossed that to the Big Skunk. The Big Skunk was a BC Big Bud crossed with a skunk number 1 back from the 80s that a friend of mine had maintained for a long, long time. And he brought that to me, and it had incredible structure. It had incredible virility, great disease prevention and pest resistance, but it really lacked in the potency and it really lacked in the flavor profile. But it had absolutely amazing flower morphology and plant structure. So when I crossed that to the fruit bound, I ended up finding this one cultivar that was the one that you and I had both really enjoyed that sort of gave me everything that I was looking for in terms of like a euphoric, mentally functional high where I could be creative but focused and not scatterbrained at all, not, daydreaming, but really, really focused. I used to say it was almost like my favorite form of Adderall.
Right?
It just gave me everything that I needed to be on point, but clear-minded. And I have continued to play with that line a little bit, and I've actually been playing with it, trying to get it to become a better hasher, because these days I smoke much, much less flower. Again, sort of trying to be efficient and lean and economic. Hash is more economic because I'm able to utilize less of it. B, it lasts longer and is more stable. But C, it also is better for me health-wise because I'm able to consume less combustion, have less biomass that's being vaporized or smoked. So these days I smoke almost exclusively solventless hash resin, like live rosins. Mm-hmm. And it's been a tough one. It makes great live rosin, but it comes out liquid. I don't know how familiar you are with working with live rosins, but generally fresh press comes out, liquid, and then as soon as it cools to any sort of form, it becomes very tacky and very shattery, very, very stable but unstable at the same time. It has no pliability to it. It's just very delicate and glass-like. And this one, no matter what I do, I can put it in a deep freezer at 0 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 days, and it still comes out gooey.
Interesting.
It is so weird, and the only thing that I can attribute to it is the high level of terpenes creating a solvent effect in the product that is not allowing it to solidify, because it gets none of that standard fresh press. Like I don't know how many dozens and dozens of cultivars I've worked with live resins or live rosins, and it's always a bit tacky and shattery when, especially in fresh, frozen, and cold. And this stuff is just goo. It stays goo. It doesn't matter if I put it down to -15, it stays gooey. And so trying to work with that, trying to get it to become a little bit more stable. Also, the issue with that is that when you're trying to wash something like that, it doesn't wash as well. You really want something with more of a sandy consistency, something a little bit more stable, granular heads. They wash much better. They don't stick to your bags as well. This sticks to bags like a nightmare. It sticks to everything like a nightmare. But it's just such a phenomenal product and such a great experience that even though every single aspect of its characteristics physically tells me to say fuck it, I just keep wanting to work with it and try to figure out some way of either breeding or post manipulation that I can do to make it more stable, to make it more viable, so that way I can turn it into the hash that I love to smoke.
I wonder if you could turn it into like a pen.
Well, I mean, decarbing and depolymerization process for live rosin is totally something I do. I make concentrates and turn them into vape carts all the time because that's probably my number one way of consuming these days, just due to the nature of my business and traveling and clandestine nature of it. It's the most functional for me to be able to medicate, as well as the most covert and doesn't draw attention and is very enjoyable still. Because really, at the end of the day, I want the highest fidelity quality product that I can in the best way that I can apply it. So I've turned it into carts. It's got a great polymerization retention process, actually. So usually I have, anywhere from a 10 to 20% loss in the depol process. But this one retains much more. But again, its initial extractions process is just so low. Because of the oiliness, because of the viscosity and the stickiness of it and the instability of it, the washing process gives me such low yields that even though the depolymerization process has a comparably very high yield compared to multiple other cultivars that wash well, you're almost still not quite getting a good enough conversion to make it economically worth it to make something that's, a bunch of amazing flower and then take that and choose to process it into frozen, and then take that, go through the entire process of washing, freeze drying, and then depolymerization, and then carting.
There's a gentleman on Instagram, I think it's Zeus Extractions or Extraction Zeus. Reach out to him, because that was one of the things that he's been playing with, is developing other extraction methods or techniques for hard to work with cultivars.
I'm looking him up right now.
There you go. Just hit him up and tell him I sent you. You'll get a fucking earful. Yeah, but he's been playing with some really cool stuff as far as different methodologies, and he's tried to be a big part of the hash community and sharing his tech, and he just doesn't get any level of response, and it's sad because the stuff that I've received from him is fucking off the hook. It's amazing.
Really?
I know he's doing the work. He's got some crazy cultivars. As a matter of fact, I actually sent him. I think you knew I've been working with Ecosphere Sciences for the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
We did a cannabis destruction. I worked with a company out here who has to deal with the cleanup. So that would be, the leftovers, resins or goops and gels and plants and, shake, you name it, even the expired pre-rolls. So this guy brought us up a ton of this material. I mean, trash cans of it. We ran it all through the muncher. We horrified the whole neighborhood because, dude, it smelled like a friggin' Grateful Dead concert. I mean, really bad. But the result was this product that I was like, oh, I guarantee you this, if you put this on a cannabis plant, it'll freak the fuck out. And so this one cultivar that was very, very difficult to grow. It's so sensitive, not something any person other than a very, very good cultivator should be playing with. And he treated some with traditional fertilizer. I think he had a control, and then he also treated it with MJ. And what happened was that plant, the mother was still in 5s. The clone that was, only half the size or less than the mother started throwing 7s within a few weeks of the time that he did the first application. So that's how powerful the MJ was. Muncher juice using Mary Jane, right? That's why I called it MJ. But the interesting thing was that when he did finally get that plant to fruition and extracted it, he got some crazy ass freaking hash, dude. And I'm pretty sure that he's repeating that, or maybe he moved to a different line because of how much of a bitch that plant was. But yeah, I think he'd be a good asset for you for helping you maybe steer the manufacturing process of that cultivar, because again, that was just a real winner all the way up and down, other than making hash, obviously.
I'd be absolutely.
Just to let you know, he actually did a show. You can look under specials in the playlist on exactly one of the processes that he's using, and it's a new methodology per se, but it's actually under the specials. You can check that out, but definitely contact him. Yep.
Is it correct, Ken? Was it on this channel or was it on the FPC channel?
No, it was on our channel, and he had a gentleman from Europe come on as well and explain what he's doing. The methodologies were just next level on what can be done to get a more pure product. So yeah, it was a fantastic show, but it's under specials in the playlist.
Thanks, Ken. I don't remember it, but then again, I'm getting old and I don't remember shit anymore.
Do you have the vape?
So tell me of some of the other cultivars you've been playing with prior to your house construction.
So the last major runs that I did was all hash washings focused. Let's see. I ran Superboof, Poontang Pie, and Mimosa from good friends of mine in Oklahoma, straight from a hash house. That's a buddy of mine. That's all he does is solventless rosin. And they were phenomenal. Really, really phenomenal. Especially the Superboof just yielded absurd amounts. Really, really absurd amounts. Like I think we were hitting upwards of 6 on the wash, and then high 90s on the follow through. I meant the extra one I gave you. And The mimosa did really, really well as well. The Jersey Juice Grape Stomper was probably one of the best profiles that we had, but did not yield comparably. So it was, fours to maybe fives on the wash. But damn, it was good. Real good. Really, really good. Great flavor, great profile. Aside from that, oh man, I did a garlic butter, which was a mother's milk hash plant crossed with a garlic cookies. And I don't think I have ever had a plant dump like this plant did. I mean, we're talking probably close to 8-9%, maybe 10s. No flavor. None. No flavor whatsoever. No smell. Slapped. Slapped like an angry ex, man. I mean, we tested her out. She came down at 37% TAC.
Oh, so she's a leg taker out her.
It ruined a lot of people's days. It ruined a lot of people's days, mine included, multiple times. It's not one that you can play around with. It's not one that you can have your way with. She just beats you down and then tells you to say thank you. But she has been a phenomenal cross stock. So I've been mixing her with like the Tropicana cookies or the Trop Nana. That both were very, very high terpene profiles, decent washers, but just didn't give the yields that I had hoped for, and also didn't give the yields that I would want based off the volatility of the terpene profile. So they were so loud, but yielded so little that it was almost overpowering. So what I ended up doing was I ended up mixing them with the garlic butter on the press. That way I was able to retain those terpene profiles, but emulsify them into a larger substrate of cannabinoids that was able to give me a more well-rounded and balanced product. So I was able to come down from, a 37% on the garlic butter and 32% on the Trop Nana. And I was able to meet somewhere in the range of, a 34, 35%. But my terpene profile went from 0 on the garlic butter and like 9 or 10 on or actually maybe even closer to 11 on the Trop Nana or the Trop Cookie. And I was able to find myself around like, an 8 or a 9% terp and a 33, 34% TAC. So it was able to give me a much more rounded product. And I'm really finding that though I love single source, I've traveled across the country and I've been working with so many hash makers in the past year that Nicotine was one of the people that also really sort of helped to instill this into me, was don't be so dead set that it has to be single source if it's to the detriment of the end product. Mm-hmm. If you're able to create something more profound and enjoyable by blending two beautiful pieces of work, do it. It don't get caught up in the dogma and the proprietariness of, well, it's single source, all from this one plant. I mean, we're all large scale growers. We all understand that, even if we're growing all, Super Boo for Trop Nana or Trop Cookie or whatever, the chemovar variation across those plants is going to be pretty substantial. Even if we're growing in an indoor environment, we're going to have a breadth of chemical makeup there. So really, single source is nice and it's important to be able to say, like, it's all this one thing, but it's not like you're snapshotting that one chemical prospect or that one chemical profile of that one plant. You're snapshotting a blend of all of those different plants in that chemovar selection of that cultivar that you're then washing and then processing and homogenizing. So yeah, you get a closer variant, but I mean, you're still a spectrum. Now, if I can drastically increase the quality of that finished product by adding another plant to that spectrum, why not? as long as you're maintaining the qualities that the single source guarantees, which is all from the same farm, all from the same methodologies, same media, same light sources, then I really don't see that there's any issue as far as still maintaining purity, so to speak, of an end product. We're mixologists. And I mean, really, it's like saying that you can only have a good bourbon if it's from only Jack Daniels. And it's like, well, there's way better bourbons out there, and a lot of them do blending and not just single batch.
Dude, I love blended scotch. I've tried a ton of single malts, and it's just, I don't get it. Like, the blend is so much more smooth. It's just, it finishes nice. You don't have those weird type, like, not hangovers, but spent feeling the next day.
Yep.
It's so much easier on your body. So I get it. You know, when I first learned about pressing, the friend of mine, he hired me to help him deal with his cannabis plants because he was just having a terrible time with insect infestations, fusarium, you name it. So I said, you know, this is a biological Eden bomb. If you apply this both in as a soil drench and as a foliar, you're gonna knock back those problems significantly. And if you grow from start to finish, you're probably not going to have those kinds of infestations that you're typically having because you're just pure NPK. And so he was really into this, the cannabis culture in the community. He bought one of those brick presses with the friggin' hydraulic jack on it. You know, it was barbaric to say the least. And he was showing me how to, take the cannabis plant and press it and make this gooey oil and then smoke it. And I enjoyed it. So, as I was over there working one day, I just grabbed a couple different nuggets. I think it was like 3 or 4 different nuggets from 3 or 4 different cultivars we had. And I pressed them all together. Dude, it was fucking amazing. Like, you could literally make your own like snow cone flavors of these different products. Like, oh, I love the high of this one, but I love the smell of that one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I just started playing around with it when I was over there working, and I really enjoyed it. So I encourage people to look at, stepping outside the box a little and experiment with, with these cultivars, especially when you're making hash. As long as they're all dumping, who cares? And then see what you get. Make it a one-off, a limited edition product.
Yep. And I mean, I know some of the best hash makers in the country, and some of their best selling products are their blends. It's not just saying that you can take anything and mix them together. It takes, again, a connoisseur's eye, a connoisseur's nose and palate to be able to know what will blend well together, what will complement each other. It's like saying, I grow grape, or I can grow phenomenal carrots, or I can grow phenomenal cucumbers. But to make a really nice summer salad, you need to not only be able to grow good individual ingredients, you need to know how to blend them together. You need to know how they're going to balance off of each other and what ratios you should mix them. Because you can't just throw it all in there together. You have to understand to some extent what you want to be the dominant profile, what you want to be the secondary profile, what you want to be the body and the base. Like when I was messing around with the ones we had talked about, I was using that garlic butter as the base because it was so trichome rich and just dumped so hard and had such a powerhouse of potency behind it, but it had no flavor. So then I balanced that out with, a combination of the extremely energizing, euphoric, overpoweringly fruitiness of the Tropicana cookie, and then the sort of more mellow, but still fruity, but still full-bodiedness of the Trop Nana. And it allowed us to make this really, really nicely homogenized product with a great experience of consumption that individually none of them could touch.
Interesting. See, there you go. Words of advice to the audience. Don't be afraid to try. Right?
Yeah, never be afraid to mess around. Innovation is created on the forefront of craziness. And
I love that.
Like, literally, if you're trying to be an innovator and you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing it right. If you're not failing forward, then you're not innovating. Exactly.
Great words. Great words. that's the thing is you can't even look at it's not a failure. It's a lesson.
Yeah.
You learn something. It's only a failure if you repeat it, right?
It's only a failure, in my opinion, if you don't learn from it, even if you repeat it, because there can sometimes be scientific value in repeating a mistake. You are validating that did not work. You're verifying, just like repeating that, okay, I think that this will work, and I try it again. If you're like, ooh, I think I did that wrong, and I think this is why, let me do it again wrong to validate, yes, that is what I did wrong. That is what was not what I wanted. And I mean, one of the biggest things that I took away from my years of competition fighting was one of my coaches used to tell me, every loss is a lesson if you let it be. But you have to allow it to be a lesson. You have to be willing to take from that loss. You can't just take it as a loss and be like, oh, well, I fucked up. Well, how did you fuck up? What did you fuck up? How could you not fuck that up again? How can you learn from that and take it as a lesson rather than just being like, well, I lost? Well, how can we take that loss and turn it into a win? Because I can guarantee you that both in my competition career and in my professional career, I have learned exponentially more from every single loss than I have from every victory. Every win just tells me that I didn't do something wrong, but every loss tells me what I did wrong and what I could do right and what I could do better.
Yep. Agreed 100%. It's again, it's the journey. It's the path, right?
Absolutely, man.
If you're not learning from it, then shame on you.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have too much longer, so I want to make sure that we get to the rest of what you wanted to talk about, and I also want to make sure we get some questions.
Yes, we have got a lot of questions. So why don't we just jump into questions for now, because that usually sparks other questions.
Of course.
Okie dokie. I just want to say thank you first to Lawrence for becoming a member of the channel. You guys can use the join link. I have it at $4.99 Canadian. So you guys in the US, it's really cheap to join, and it does help the channel out a lot. First question. What were you breeding? I'd love to try your genetics.
So I'm assuming that what you were talking about was what Leighton and I have been initially discussing, which was a breeding project that is still 100% exclusively in-house. I don't sell any genetics. I'm not a geneticist. I reserve that wonderful title for the people that are more talented than myself. If anything, I am phenomenally good at genetic sifting and hunting. I'm really good at finding the outliers. And that's one of the things that I'm hired to do for a lot of clientele, is to help them do genetic sifting through a plethora of different just phenotypes and chemotypes, and finding what those winners are and making sure that we make those selections accurately for whether they're looking for production value, extractions value, or breed stock value. Those are all different things that we're going to be looking at as far as characteristics of that genetic and what makes it excellent. So what we were talking about, though, was a modified genetic that I made off of an orange fruit bound, which is from Green Team Genetics right here in Massachusetts. A good buddy of mine, Tom. And Green Team has done a great job a number of years ago of crossbreeding an I-95 with an Agent Orange and creating the orange fruit bound, which is just a superb genetic, wonderfully delicious, really flavorful, very unstable hash, but really fun to play with. And that's what I've been trying to work on, is getting it to be a more stable hash, because it's just so terpene rich and dominant in these volatile monos that it does not like to solidify or stabilize in any way. It doesn't like to nucleate. It just stays, like I said, liquid even when I freeze it.
You know, that reminds me of Sasquatch. He grew a cultivar that was at 12, and you could see the shit dripping on the inside of the jar.
Yep.
And this is flour.
Yep.
So that's probably your problem, is you're just so high in terpenes that it won't.
Yeah. I mean, there's a genetic anomaly also called gutication, which is essentially, I mean, it's what it sounds like, gutication. It is, you'll occasionally see the actual flower itself that almost forms what looks like teardrops or dewdrops on it. And it is essentially massive overproduction of oils in those specific areas, and it creates little globules on the actual flower itself. There was a product that was given to me. It was a lilac diesel by a friend of mine from a small cultivation that was a no-till, and it came in as flower at 7% terpenes.
Wow.
Blew my mind. I said, no way, absolute bullshit. Like, no, that's a paper mistake from the lab. There's no way. And he handed me the flower, and it was well cured, not excessively cured, not over dried, right at that perfect point of ripeness and readiness. And it was in a sandwich bag, classic old way you get it in a little sandwich bag. And I was going through my standard evaluation protocol. So I was doing the little pinch and rub, getting an idea of what the density was like, seeing what the inflorescence was like, the morphology, the structure. And then I took the bag and I cracked it open and I smelled it. And I was like, wow, what the hell? Like it burned my sinuses a little bit. And so I was like really excited and didn't think to continue my standard protocol. And I just took the nugget right out of the bag and I was like, what is this? And I'm stuffing it in my nose and smelling it and breaking it open. And then I looked at the bag, and the bag looked like it had a ring of olive oil around where the bud had been, where I had been doing my tactile test and squeezing. And I took the bag and I took the nugget separately, and I'm looking at the bag and I'm rubbing the bag, and the bag is just slipping over itself like it's got oil in it, like olive oil. And it was just this golden halo inside the bag. And I've never, ever seen anything like that. It just blew my mind.
Interesting. Cool. Are there any other breeders that you'd like to shout out before we move on to the next question?
So as far as hash washing, my buddy Rooted New York right now. Aaron is a phenomenally talented cultivator. He's not currently doing much breed work, but he's, again, a very talented sifter. If you're on the East Coast and you're looking for good genetics, Rooted NY is a phenomenal young man, brilliant mind. I've had the pleasure to speak on multiple panels and conferences with him, and wonderful friend, wonderful person, great resource of knowledge, good genetic stock. Another good one would be Herb is the Word on Instagram, and Wicked Sour. They are both phenomenal breeders working almost exclusively on hash washing product. I've gotten some great ones from them. The Jersey Juice, the Grape Stomper from them was just fantastic. They've been working on Herb's Words. Been working really hard on autoflowers and making really high quality flower and really high quality washers from autos, because honestly, in the long run, I think that personally photo periods are going to be the best selections for flower, for really high end flower. But I think that autos are going to be the way for the hash. The ability to run cyclic cycles and just perpetuate, and the ability to have really young plants that are pulling really high quality, but can be pulled early for that look that the market wants. Even though personally I like a much more matured hash. I like a darker hash, not a white hash. The market right now really likes that white, and autoflowers are really able to deliver on really well-developed cannabinoid and terpene profiles and good washing, but still getting that really crisp young look because of the way that they flower.
Great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, that was kind of the next question, because this came back when you were talking about the autoflowers. You want to give the name of the breeder for the autos again for people?
Yep, hang on 1 second. I want to make sure that I get it exactly right. He's a good buddy of mine. His name is Forrest, and he's out of Maine. I believe he's still operating out of Maine. Words Herbs. So WORDSHERBS on Instagram.
Word Herbs.
There you go.
Yep, Words Herbs.
Okay.
And him and Wicked Sour, which is WICKEDSOWA, and Hash Farm Maine, hash.farm.maine. Those are three great accounts to follow. Two really solid dudes that have been doing fantastic work. Some really excellent washers, great hashers, great flavors and profiles, and good stability.
And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and if any of you guys, reach out to them, let them know Benjamin Acadia sent you.
There you go. It's always good to get the referral in, because
of course. I mean, they're excellent to find, and they'll be happy to take care of you. They're really excellent humans.
Good. So Shawnee wanted to know, where can I get a grow guide for auto from soil to seed to harvest?
That's a great question that I honestly don't have a good answer for. As far as a guide, I think he means along the lines of a book.
Well, yeah, because it's morphed so much in the last 5 years. It went from just don't do anything, water only, to now talking about potassium heavy and some of these other nutrients. So there probably isn't anything, but the only thing I could say is I believe Jeff Lowenfeld, whether he wrote a book or he
did
on it,
he did.
That would be a good place to start, but that's probably it's probably obsolete because of how quickly this.
Yes and no. I would say that it is potentially obsolete in some nuances, but he does such a deep level of research before he produces anything that I would say that it would be a very excellent foundational experience for anyone that's looking to do autoflower cultivation. The biggest thing that I would say is nothing is gospel yet. Nothing is written in stone when it comes to autoflowers. We have gotten really, really good at dialing in science when it comes to photoperiods, especially with the research that's been done by like Dr. Bruce Bugsby from Utah State University. But when it comes to autoflowers, it is still such a nuanced and fresh young science. And the genetics are being manipulated at such a rate because like when you think of photoperiods, you can have one progeny a year. If you're growing indoors, you can have two. And if you're talking, cycled end to cycle end. With autos, I can run and do genetic every 3 months. So you're talking 4 times the speed of genetic proliferation. So you have such an exponentially larger ability to manipulate those genetics and to pull from those viable genetics that things are shifting way too fast for there to be solid science on a breadth of knowledge. That said, the basics are always going to be the basics for autos. So read the Jeff Lowenfeld's book, understand that as your basic, but then also understand that depending on the genetics that you are running, there may be fluctuation within those parameters. And don't hold anything to gospel, don't hold anything to stone. So be very flexible in your cultivation and in your methodology. Use those rudimentary guidelines as your baselines and then fluctuate and play with it, because the genetics that you're going to be working with are going to be fluctuant. They're going to be, again, even just within autoflowers in general. I mean, unless you have an incredibly well stabilized line of feminized, every plant's going to be different. I've run acres and acres of autos, and it's literally a crapshoot for the most part. You're going to get a reasonably homogenized profile, hopefully, if you've got a really good breeder that you selected from, and if you've done a good job of giving them all an equal start. But I mean, even then, chemovar wise, it can be drastically different. So I would say when it comes to autos, my favorite thing about autos is running non-feminized regulars. And I select out the females from those regulars and I call my males. Unless I've got a really exceptional male, then I'll allow him to get to the point of pollen drop and then I'll call, because it's always pre-flowering for my females and I'll separate them out. But I love the uniqueness. I love that. Maybe it's just because I've gotten to the point in my career and my experience where I've seen so many hundreds of thousands of plants that I enjoy and seek out the unique and the one-off and the never going to exist again. But there's something that I find so beautiful and enjoyable about growing a plant and knowing that no matter whether I love it or hate it, I'll never have it again. That when that jar is gone, it's gone. It's done. You know what I mean? I could pop another 1,000 seeds and never find that exact chemovar again, that exact cultivar again, that exact phenotype. And to me, as a grower who sees so much variety and sees so much consistency, and for a lot of my professional career targets consistency and has built a brand and an ethos around producing and providing consistency. Because at the end of the day, a manufacturer client that hires me, they don't want randomized nuance. They don't want one-offs. They want repeatable, consistent metrics. They want to know that every time they grow this, they're going to hit these profiles, they're going to hit these yields, they're going to get a repeatable product because that's what the consumer wants. Nobody wants to go buy a Bud Light, and every time they buy the Bud Light, it's a different flavor and a different alcohol content. No, they buy it because it's identical every single time, no matter where you are in the world. They are buying a comfortable repeatability and consistency. And to some extent, cannabis users are as well, especially when you start to get into the medical realm. They need that consistency. So the very aspect that I love so much about autos is very much so also something that is non-viable for a lot of large-scale producers when it comes to autos. So as far as a small-scale home producer, enjoy it, love it, revel in the fact that you'll never get that freaking plant again, and enjoy every last little bit of it, and then have fun, chase it, and try to find it again. Try to get as close as you can and see if you can find a sister. But it's not an end of the day thing. It's not a make or break thing. If you're in production, if you're in consistency, if you're in the industry, don't fuck with it. Just don't. It's not worth it. Unless you're looking to build a brand off one-offs, which I have seen. A friend of mine is building a brand off of one-offs, and he makes insanely high quality hash solventless cartridges, and it's one and dones. And that's what he's built his brand on, is the hype of it's when it's gone, it's gone. If you love it, you better come and get it. And you better get it right now, because when it's done, it's done. And there'll never be another one of that batch. Whether I love it and want to bring it back or you do, it doesn't matter. It's gone. And you can build a demand on that. But that's an even more niche market than the standard niche market. So don't build a business model on that necessarily, unless you're really in the top tier of what you're doing, and that's you want to be the weird. But in general, they're so much fun to grow.
Another suggestion might be reach out to your breeder. I know some breeders do give instructions on what the cultivars like.
Sure.
That will bridge the gap between.
They'll give you some baseline guidance, and right. It'll give you the playbook, but it doesn't give you the play-by-play. You know what I mean? It's not like where we've gotten to with a lot of photo periods where I can literally tell you down to the day what you need to be doing and what you will be seeing and what you should be expecting. Where with these, it's more like
okay, Corral.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's like the pirate's code is not a law. It's more like guidelines. You just sort of play within the guidelines.
Love it. Fucking love it.
Well, that was a good conversation. So we'll go to the next one here. What nutrients are you running?
Okay, that's a tough one, bro. Leighton knows me. Leighton's one of my founding mentors. When I was a wee little lad, Leighton took me under his wing along with a handful of other exceptional people like Kevin Jodry, Wendy Kornberg, Suzanne Wainwright. And I have been for a long time a sustainable and regenerative cultivation specialist, and that is where my passion lies. That said, living soil applications are not for everyone, and they are absolutely not for every facility. In fact, the vast majority of clientele that I work with in the commercial space are not living soils. Most of them are not even in what I would really consider true organics. They're in modified organics, hybrid organics, or synth. And that's fine. Everybody needs to work within the framework that they are trying to build their business model on. And your business model determines what methodology you should be using. So personally, I'm running all soils that I create. Leighton came by the first year, 8 years or so ago, when I first made my outdoor 16-foot beds. I made 16-foot long, 4-foot wide, 1-foot deep raised beds into native soil that was on top of an old pig farm section of my farm. So it was really, really intensely nutrient dense soil that I then built a substrate on top of that was geared more towards the nutrient needs, specifically though the root structure and soil structure that those plants needed. Not so much thinking nutrient wise, but thinking much more along soil structure wise. Like Leighton talks about, alluvial layers are key, understanding what the root surfaces are really seeking as far as soil construction and different methodologies that you can use there to add to them. So I provide dry organic amendments to my soils once every number of years. I think I did my first amendment 4 years in after running because I finally saw a drop off in my yields and my potencies that was comparable. Again, always about economic thresholds. So if I were to run a bottled nutrient line, which is, I believe, what you were really alluding to, there's a lot of good ones out there. There's a lot that my clientele use, but if I were to give you one that was in my opinion, sort of the best of everything, the Rooted Leaf. Rooted Leaf Agritech is a phenomenal company. They're US based. Everything is created through plant fermentations or acid extractions. So I'm a big natural farmer in my personal life, and also when I can be in my professional life. Certified level 2 soil smith under Chris Trump Natural Farming Co. And I love the fact that Rooted Leaf has taken a lot of the same principles of aerobic and anaerobic fermentations and acid extractions from the natural farming consideration, like from that sort of world of growing, if you will. And they applied a lot more consistent, stable science to it, and made it into something that was commercially viable. It's a phenomenal nutrient line. It really is. They've got great ability to balance and to really titrate the nutrient line to individual cultivars, where I feel that so many nutrient lines are always trying to pitch a one size fits all. They're just like, here's the feed chart, here's the regimen, doesn't matter what you're growing. And though they provide a basic feed chart, again, it's a guideline. And they're the first ones to tell you that. They'll give you a reactive feed chart that you can put in your different tweaks into, and it'll calibrate the entire feed charts to what you've made your slight tweaks to, whether you're talking EC overall or specific individual nutrients that you're trying to target at different life stages or for different cultivars. So I've really found that they are an excellent one, also because they really do their due diligence when it comes to sourcing and to vetting their sources and making sure that they are sustainable, organic, and really clean. They're not organically certified in all portions because they literally can't be, because of some of the methods that they use of acid extractions of minerals. You can't get an organic cert on something that was never alive. But they really do an amazing job of producing comparable to living soil microbiology and terpene and cannabinoid profile diversity. So not just getting high tax and high terps, but what you're actually producing. So you're not just getting a ton of THC and a ton of THCA and a ton of CBD, but secondary metabolites across the board. They really do an excellent job of producing a product that does that. And they also really do an excellent job of doing it in a holistic and caring way. When you reach out to the company, you get the actual owners. Like I talk to Nick, the CEO, and Raj all the time. They're great people, and I talk to them both professionally and personally. And, we have our agreements, we have our disagreements. And that's one of the things I love about them, is that we can have these difficult conversations, and I can bring them to hardline clients and put them in front of them and know that they're going to, stand behind their answers. And whether it's what the client wants to hear or not, it's the right answers. And that's really, at the end of the day, what I put the most foundation into is, are you speaking truth, or are you speaking what's wanting to be heard? And at the end of the day, I would always rather tell you what is real and what is factual, whether it's what you want to hear or not. And I will always lean on that when it comes to any recommendation of any company. If they're going to just, feed you a line, I'll never recommend them. If they're going to feed you a hard truth because it's good for you, and even if it's bad for them, then that's the type of people I want to work with. I want the guy that's going to shoot himself in the foot because it's going to save me down the line, because he's got the conscience and the mind and the wherewithal to do so.
Do you know if they sell them to Canada?
As far as I know, they're working international.
Cool. That's the type of company I really like. They're honest, down to earth, and don't bullshit people.
Yeah. And I mean, Nick is, I like to think I'm a well-educated man. I like to think that I'm reasonably intelligent, and have had some incredible mentors that have given me great understanding, greater than my knowledge of years. Nick makes me feel stupid. When it comes to plant nutrition, it is rare that I have conversations with people that make me feel as dumb as Nick, and I love it, because whenever I talk to him, even if it's not even a conversation between just him and me offline, or him and me on a podcast or whatever, but just I'll bring a client to them and they'll ask a question. I'm like, oh, I never really thought of that necessarily. And then Nick brings something out and I'm like, okay, so I learned something today, and it wasn't even a question that I had. And I feel that that's the place where you always want to find yourself. You always want to try to be the student in the room. You always want to be the one that has the most to learn, unless you're being paid to be the one that has the most to say. So unless it's one of my workshops, seminars, or like when I'm going to be keynote speaking at NECA in Boston in March, that's when I want to be the big brain in the room, because I want to be bringing the most value that I can to the table for those that are there to learn. But where I want to be and where I like to be is I like to be in that learner's chair, just listening and eating it up and feeding off of what they have to say. And Nick is just a real powerhouse of knowledge, and he does a great job of breaking it down to an assimilatable level. And one of the things that's really interesting about their product line is they run everything in a carbon dense form. So every single nutrient that they utilize is incredibly carbon dense and to a very, very low micronized level. Now, the reason that that is so important is that plants utilize carbon to build, just like everything else in the world, to build every cell that's in their bodies or in their structures. Now, they gain most of their carbon through soil assimilation and through CO2. That's one of the reasons that CO2 has been such a big thing in cannabis production as far as biomass, is that you can drastically increase your secondary metabolites as well as your biomass by providing more CO2. Now, why is that? It's because the plant is gaining access to more carbon than it normally would be. But that plant then has to take CO2, it has to take it in, it has to take ATP, which is the essential energy building block that plants and all living things use to create cellular function. And it gains that ATP through photosynthesis. So it has to expend energy to build this energy molecule, to then spend that energy to break apart this other molecule of CO2 that it is intaked into carbon and oxygen. Now it assimilates that carbon and uses it to build cellular structure, and it has to off-gas that oxygen back into its environment because it has no use for it. That's why plants breathe in CO2 and they breathe out oxygen. They are breathing in carbon oxide or carbon dioxide, and they are then breathing out double oxide. They're breathing out O2 and just holding on to that one carbon atom. Now, what if we were able to provide those plants more carbon atoms without the necessary need for them to break down and spend energy to assimilate that carbon, right? They feed more than 50% of their nutrient product through foliars. So very minimal, really only your baseline nutrition in this feed program goes in through your soil substrate. The rest of it is foliar applied, almost exclusively through the vegetative stage. So through the entire vegetative stage, you are preloading this plant's cellular matrix with foliar carbon and the trace nutrients and minerals that it needs to be able to produce what it needs to produce. But you are just banging it with carbon to the point that they have actually seen a substantial drop-off in the necessary amount of supplemental CO2, but still gaining the benefits.
Sweet.
Now, their quote, not mine, but their quote, because I have not reproduced this science myself, so I cannot stand on it, but I can say that I believe in them and I believe in their science. They have quoted that they are able to produce up to a 1,600 ppm CO2 supplementation purely through their foliar feeding, being carbon dense. That's amazing. They're able to micronize their carbon to such a small level that it is able to directly absorb through the cells of the exterior of the plant. So when you spray it onto the plant's exterior, it is able to directly absorb through the cellular matrix into the interior of those cells and become readily available carbon for that plant to start building with at site. There's no translocation energy spent. There's no breakdown energy spent. There's no relocation energy spent. There's no assimilation energy spent. It is pure free energy for them. And it's also had great impact on pest and pathogen resistances. So, I mean, there's very, very few nutrient lines that I get hyped about. And Leighton knows me. I'm a tried and true living soils man. Though I work with all sorts of things. I mean, a lot of my clients are salt-based. But this one's one I get to geek out on and I get really excited about. And it's just so cool to see what it can do.
So it's funny that you started getting into carbon, because that's something I've been speaking a lot about lately, is the fact that we shouldn't talk about any fertilizer without talking about carbon.
Absolutely.
Carbon needs to be the primary. It shouldn't be
number one.
It should be CNPK if you're dealing with
I was about to say, you took the words out of my mouth. I was literally going to say, how can we even say NPK and not have C in there?
Right. And it should be C, NPK, calcium, sulfur. I mean,
Yeah.
There's so many more nutrients that we don't talk about, whether they're synthetic or organic and natural. But anyway, yeah, that was something that I had to come up with, Ben, because of the number of clients that I have to deal with that are always like, oh, well, what's the NPK of muncher juice? What's the NPK of your compost extract? And it's like, no, you need to start thinking about CNPK. And if you ask me that question, I can begin to open your eyes to the fact that what you're really looking for is C pre-NPK. Because
don't go too deep on them now.
Pre-NPK means biology.
Yes.
So why are we even talking about NPK? And as soon as you break that knot in their fucking heads, now you can start to talk to them, because prior to that, you say soil biology, they're like, what the fuck is that bullshit? But as soon as you say C pre-NPK, they go, oh, that's right. We lived on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years before NPK was a thing.
We are all carbon-based life forms.
Yeah. What is it?
Carbon, not the number one nutritional consideration.
Agreed. And so, yeah, I get really amped up when people start talking about carbon. And
yeah, man, you should connect with Nick.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to get his ass on this show.
Honestly, I first met Nick speaking with Hoda Herb on a open form podcast that Hoda was hosting, which was the Grow and Tell. And he had Nick on pretty consistently, and then Nick became a co-host. And I just remember every time that I jumped on with Hoda as a guest speaker, and I'd be like, who the hell is this Nick dude? And why does my brain hurt so bad? And, you know, like, I'm being brought on to be one of the powerhouse speakers, and I'm leaving the conversation being like, I gotta go back to my notebook. Like, he was saying words that I have never heard before. What is this thing he's talking about? It's like, just
all right, dude. Text me his contact.
Absolutely, I will. Nick is phenomenal.
Okay, well, let's go to the next question here, and it's an easy one. Where is Acadia Farms located?
So we are located in southeastern Massachusetts, right in Rehoboth, actually. It's a little tiny right to farm found. And that said, though, I mean, I work across the entire country, to some extent across the globe. I've worked numerous times in Europe, the Caribbean, and I've worked all across the United States. So there is nowhere that I do not go, nowhere. The way I look at it is knowledge has no bounds. So why on earth would I allow myself to? So I go anywhere and everywhere that the knowledge brings me. Speaking engagements bring me all across the country and the world. Educational opportunities for myself. I am always a humble student of life and always looking to expand and learn. I spend thousands to tens of thousands of dollars every year on expanding my own knowledge, staying up to date on whatever is currently developing, learning from people in their backyards, in their grow sheds, in their, you know, large scale facilities. There is no place, in my opinion, that is too great or too small to learn from.
Well put.
Yep.
And agreed.
I tell people, listen to many voices, find the ones that resonate with you, listen to those, but never block out anybody else, because you can always learn in nuances. It's all about nuance.
Yeah, honestly, I can say that I have certainly learned more from those that did not resonate with me than from those that did. Because those that did not resonate with me forced me to challenge my own thoughts, forced me to challenge my preconceptions, my pre-understandings. And one of the greatest parts of science and one of the bases of science is constantly to question. There is something that I feel that has been lost maybe in the past few decades of science, and that's that you shouldn't question the science. The essence of science is to question. The basis of all science is empirical formula. And the basis of empirical formula is a question, a hypothesis. And then you have to prove that hypothesis true or false. So if you're not questioning something, whether you believe it to be true or not, whether they believe it to be true or not, then you're really never able to learn or progress. So question everything, question me, and I'll never hate you for it. Like, geez, some of my favorite people that I've had in my conferences have been like, all right, Ben, I just listened to your entire hour and a half long, proposal here, your whole presentation, I think you're wrong. And I'm like, great, let's talk about it. Perfect. Bring it. Let's do it. And I've absolutely learned from them. And sometimes I have been wrong, and sometimes I've been able to show them that they were wrong. But either way, we were able to grow from the experience.
Yeah, you're both learning. And we better speed this up. We got 15 minutes and 7 questions.
Hi, Leighton. I was looking at the product bio, and I'm sure it's from Fish Brew. Do you have any advice on it?
Yeah, DM me. I'll tell you all about it.
Yes, he will.
Yeah, DM is at Kingdom Aquaponics, LLC.com.
He will talk ad nauseum about it. He's passionate.
Yes, I agree. And he needs to be, because that's one of the main components of life, is that earlier biology, and that's the aquatic.
Absolutely. Fish Brew is a fantastic product.
Yep.
I wish I could afford to put it on everything.
Right?
Don't put it on your fiance, okay?
Oh, yeah, no, that'll end a relationship real quick. That's a great way, like top 10 of like how to lose a guy in one day. All right, top tips for a new grower, outdoors auto. Outdoors auto, plant your plant in its forever home at the beginning. Put the seed where it is going to stay. If you need to adulterate your environment to maintain its nubile growth time, do so. What I mean by that is don't put it indoors in a tent, in a solo cup to nurture it and baby it so that it stays warm and humid. Allow it to go outside immediately. If you need to increase the warmth and humidity, do it through secondary methods. Do it through creating a little greenhouse around it using, a shoebox and some clear plastic. Use insulating methodologies like soil or hay bales, and again, plastic tarping. It is insane what you can do by cutting down wind chill just through some semi-permeable to non-permeable barrier walls, and then creating a glass or plastic lens above it for sunlight to magnify through. I mean, some of the best things that I have ever seen for really, really rudimentary beginners grows was you build a box out of 4 hay bales on top of your raised bed, and then you just put an old busted window or not a busted window in the sense of broken glass, but you have a busted window. You take one of your drop window panes out and you lay that flat right on top of it, and you create a mini greenhouse. Now allow that plant to get 6 to 8 inches tall, and then start to allow some airflow in there. Break open your side walls a little bit of your insulation of your hay, so you get a little bit more thermal drafting through there. Don't remove your glass. Keep that thermal amplifier by allowing that lens to multiply the heat that's being applied through the solar radiation. But you're allowing your environment to become a little bit drier or a little bit moister, depending on where you're at in your environment outdoors. But you're allowing it to get a little bit cooler and a little bit warmer and have a little more fluctuation by cracking those sidewalls and opening up those bales of hay a little bit. And then as soon as it's really developed, you just pop that L off and let it rip.
I think they call those cold houses or
cold house. Well, yeah, I mean, it's like a modified cold house.
Yep.
Like a real rink-a-dink cold house.
But it works.
It does. Yep. It does. Yep. I mean, I've seen phenomenal cold house work running microgreens and leafy greens all winter long with 5-6 inches of snow outdoors. No problems whatsoever, hitting -10. And the cold houses are able to maintain a thermal area inside that's warm enough that the plants might have a little detriment, but they survive. So when it comes to your auto, put it in its forever home outdoors immediately. Don't try to transplant. Be very, very frugal with your topping, and be very, very familiar with your genetics before doing any forms of topping. Many autoflowers, as soon as you do any forms of topping or growth mitigation, growth directional control, you trigger a systemic response inside the plant, which immediately throws it into flowering. So I've seen way too many people that have a 6-inch tall plant that's flowering hard because they fucked with a little bit too much and created too much of a stress response early on in its life cycle. Let it run, let it do its thing. If you really want to play hard with them, talk to your breeder and make sure that you have a geneticist that has a plant that can handle that type of manipulation.
Good point. Good point. So we'll jump to the next one. Thanks for the question info. Looking into organic growing amendments, indoor, bone meal, blood meal, okay to utilize in an indoor residential area?
Yee. So the hippie in me says, yeah. The homeowner and renter in me and landlord says, not a chance, bro. Organic amendments have a cycle. Dry amendments create breakdown, or not create breakdown, but are beholden to breakdown. Breakdown is biological, it is digestive, it is detritic. It smells.
Mm-hmm.
Just does. I made my fiance a really, really nice light soil amendment because she had some plants that she wanted to put in her office as a financial advisor. And they were a little too stinky. And we had to pull them out for a couple of weeks while some of those soil amendments were breaking down, specifically a bone meal, a blood meal, and a bat guano. And I put very, very little amounts in there because these are just little office plants that we're talking about. So they really did not have a lot in that soil substrate, but it was enough to create an odor and a fragrance. So if you are not in an area that you need to be extremely beholden to scent, go for it. Absolutely. Run them. Don't run them hard because, again, you're going to have a different rate of biological breakdown indoors than you will outdoors because you're not being exposed to the environment the same way. You're not being exposed to rains, winds, or the sun. Even though you have interior light that you're replicating, it's not the sun. It's just not. I don't care what you're running as far as light. So, yes, absolutely within reason and with consideration for environment and location.
Well said.
Less is more.
Yeah, well said. I was waiting for you to respond, but I was going to say the same thing. Be careful because it's going to stink.
Yep. Less is more.
I know what I used to do is I'd add all my amendments into a barrel where I was composting. I'd let it compost for at least 30 days, then use it, and that odor is gone.
Yep. Allow that biological breakdown to happen beforehand. Yep. Absolutely. If you're able to, that's a great way to do it.
So next one, what's your favorite rosin pressing plant strain that a consumer, me, would be able to grow myself and wash?
Most readily available. I mean, Superboof's really, really predominant in the environment right now. It's a pretty big flower producer in the marketplace because it's not only a great washer, but it's just a great flower. Like as a standalone, many flowers that are good for washing are not good for flower production. The reason being is that what we're looking for when we're looking at washing is we're looking at a couple things. And part of it is you're looking at the head structure. You're looking at the necks. So you're looking at the actual trichome stalk and where that glandular head meets, how thick that capitate neck is, where it meets the gland. The thinner the neck is, the more delicate it is, the easier it is for you to fracture it off through mechanical separation and get that wash on. Thick necks don't snap easily, so they're a lot harder for you to get a really good wash number. Even if the flower is extremely trichome dense, it's just very common that you can have something that's, 30s and it washes 1%. And you're like, how is this possible? I look at it and it is just coated in trichomes. And I wash it and I got shit. And it's because you're washing the wrong material. You need to have a product that is viable for washing, not just something you want to wash. You know what I mean? It needs to be something that wants to wash. So you need to look at the capitate gland structure, the head size, and the neck size. And then you also need specifically to be looking at the flower morphology itself. A really, really dense, like golf ball style nug is not going to wash anywhere near as well as something that's a lot lighter and airier, because you need to think about the surface area and exposure. So the more surface area that there is, the lighter, larfier that the flower is, the more permeation water can have. The easier it is for water to get in and out of that plant structure, the easier it is for it to get in and pull that oil out with it. So often product that is not considered ideal for cannabis production or for, retail flower is some of the best for washing morphology wise. Not necessarily head wise, doesn't mean it'll actually be a good washer, but morphology wise, the lighter, the airier, the more spread out, more sativa, true traditional sativa-esque the flower structure is, the better it is for washing, because it has vastly more surface area and exposure for you to wash and pull that resin out of it. Where something that's like a really old school traditional indica structure, they're really dense. They're rock hard nugs that are just stacked calyx on calyx on calyx on calyx on calyx. And you have to do a lot more mechanical breakup to be able to expose more surface area to be able to get to it. Now, mechanically breaking things up before washing has a couple of drawbacks. You expose yourself to more chlorophyll. You expose yourself to more secondary detritus. You expose yourself to more just particulate matter in general that can seep through, get into your bag that you're going to have to clean up later on and rework to really get that clean hash. So it's more work to have more work just based off of the flower structure. So really it comes down to you need to pick the right thing for the right job. So that's why I say it's so important if you're trying to make hash, don't just go out there and start fucking popping seeds trying to find something that's going to wash well. Talk to breeders and find something that they have already looked at, that they know is going to wash well, that they have an understanding of the morphology on, and specifically that they understand what the capitate necks look like, because that's really the biggest thing. Primary is what the necks are like and the heads are like, and then secondary is what the morphology of the flower is like. Because, I mean, I can work a flower. If it's got the right heads, I'll work it hard to get all that out. But if it's got the wrong heads and the wrong structure, you're just beating your head against the wall. You can be really, really angry when you get a 1% yield off of pounds, and you're like, I could have just smoked all of that great flower because it was great flower, and instead I've got some hash.
Yep, agreed.
But yeah, Super Boof's a great one. It's one of my favorite smokes right now. Great, really nice citrusy, euphoric high, super smooth, great washer, dumps well, presses well, very stable.
Cool. Let's get to the next question here. Companion plants for soil diversity around the auto when growing outdoors.
Companion planting is companion planting, man. Don't worry about auto versus photo versus whatever. Companion planting is companion planting. You should be selecting your companion plants based off of what you are targeting them to do, not what off your crop is. The only time that I would really say that crop-specific target plant companion planting is an important thing is when you're talking about companion planting specifically targeted towards IPM, because now you're talking about specified plants and specified predators that you are trying to resist. So now it is important to think about, well, what predator is going to be present because of what plant am I growing, and therefore what companion plant do I want to plant to prevent that predator. But as far as nutritionally speaking, companion plants are companion plants, man. They're all going to be running the basics as far as either nitrogen fixing, phosphorizing, microbiology diversification. Like, I would never target feeding for a cannabis cultivar through companion planting. I would use companion planting to be my generic blanket treatments. Those are sort of like throwing nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, your majors, at a crop. That's where you want your companion planting. I would never use companion planting because, like, oh, this cultivar needs specifically a higher level of salicylic acid or calcium nitrate during this stage. That's not what they're geared towards. They're geared towards helping to reduce your overall load of work that you need to do for the basics. That's it. Use targeted through foliar applications. Foliars is really the very, very best way that I've seen to do any forms of targeted applications, specifically high need response applications. Like, you've got a deficiency, foliar. That is your fastest response time, and it is your greatest efficacy with minimal impact to your soil.
Great advice.
Yep, definitely. Well, we're basically at the end, guys. So any last words before we let
is there one last question?
It was about a specific nutrient, and I'd rather not get into specific nutrients and say what's good and what's bad. I don't think that's really where we should be. Agreed.
Well, Ben, as always, thank you so much for giving us 2 hours of your time, coming on and sharing. We went a little sideways as per usual. So thank you for putting up with that. Ken, as always, brother, thank you so much for making this happen. And keeping the good word getting out there. So much love to both of you.
It was an absolute pleasure, as always. I mean, you and I could speak ad nauseum for hours and hours and hours, as we have. I mean, some of my favorite memories are just sitting with you around a campfire at some of the events or something like that for 5-6 hours and just sort of spreading knowledge and just feeding off of each other. And I love you guys very much. I appreciate you very much. I cannot say enough about having Leighton as one of my mentors and how huge of an impact he has had on where I am today and the role that I've been able to fill today and be here for all of you. So as much as y'all love me and appreciate me, give all of that right back to Leighton and as well to Ken, because Ken does so much back end work, bringing things like this together, bringing people like myself to the forefront and giving us a platform to speak on. And most people are not as lucky as I am that they have many platforms to speak on and are constantly sort of traveling around talking, but there's nowhere that I would rather be and no one I would rather speak with than the two of you. So thank you so much. Love you both from the bottom of my heart. Deeply appreciate you and thank you for your time.
Oh, man.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, man.
So for the show, guys, next week we have Gerald Pollock, the fourth phase of water, on with Leighton. So you're not going to want to miss that. And of course, on this Wednesday, Andy Lopez and myself starting your own organic soil care services is what we're going to be talking about on Wednesday. So other than that, guys, peace out. Love that you guys all come here every week, and we will see you again soon.